Mystical City of God, translated from the original Spanish by Michael Kress, read by the translator. Book 1, Chapter 24. The Holy Exercises and Occupations of the Queen of Heaven in the first 18 months of her infancy. The forced silence of other infants during their early years, their slowness and inability to speak is a natural limitation. But in our infant queen, this silence was a heroic virtue. If words are the offspring of understanding and the expression of reason, then Mary, who possessed a perfect intellect from the moment of her conception, refrained from speaking, not because she was incapable, but because she willed not to. Other infants lacked the physical strength to open their mouths, move their delicate tongues, and articulate words. Yet, in the case of the infant Mary, this was not a limitation. She was naturally stronger, and more importantly, all her faculties obeyed her will. If she had commanded them to act, they would have done so immediately. But her silence was a great perfection and a prudent concealment of her wisdom and grace, sparing others from astonishment at the sight of a newborn speaking. Indeed, if it would have been miraculous for her to speak from birth, is it not even more astonishing that she refrained from speaking for a year and a half, despite being able to do so? 379. It was by divine ordinance that our infant lady and queen remained silent for the period during which other children are naturally unable to speak. The only exception to this was when she spoke with her holy guardian angels, or when she prayed vocally to God in solitude. For when conversing with the Lord, the source of all wisdom and the giver of her faculties, or with his angelic messengers who visibly attended her, there was no reason to maintain silence. On the contrary, it was fitting that she should use her voice in prayer, since her power of speech was not hindered in any way, and she could not remain idle in this faculty for so long. However, her mother, St. Anne, never heard her speak, nor did she suspect that her daughter possessed this ability at such a young age. This fact further confirms that her silence was an act of virtue, not necessity, and a great mystery of divine wisdom. During this period, when her mother found it appropriate, she would loosen the hands and arms of the infant Mary. Immediately, Mary would take hold of her parents' hands and kiss them with great humility and reverence. This became her constant practice as long as her holy parents lived. Even at that tender age, she found ways to show her desire for their blessing, not by asking with words, but by expressing it through silent gestures, moving their hearts to bless her without verbal request. Her reverence for them was so profound that she never failed in obedience to them in even the smallest matter, nor did she ever cause them any distress. She understood their thoughts and anticipated their desires, always acting in perfect harmony with their wishes. Every action and movement of the infant queen was governed by the Holy Spirit, ensuring that everything she did was the most perfect possible. Yet, despite executing all things flawlessly, her ardent love was never satisfied, and she constantly renewed her fervent desire for even greater spiritual gifts. Emulate the higher charisms, 1 Cor, 1231. The divine revelations and intellectual visions she received were constant, for the Most High was always present with her, and even when he momentarily suspended one form of vision or enlightenment, she was occupied with others. From the clear vision of the divinity that she had received at birth, when she was taken to heaven by the angels, cf. Supra N. 333, she retained an infused knowledge of what she had seen. Ever since that moment, having been drawn into the banquet hall of wine where divine love is perfectly ordered, Cant 2, 4, her heart was so deeply wounded by love that every time she turned to contemplation, she was entirely inflamed with divine ardor. But her body was still young and delicate, while love is as strong as death, Cant 8, 6. So intense was her love for God that she often experienced severe physical weakness and would have died from the excess of divine love had the Almighty not miraculously sustained her body and preserved her natural life. Yet, in his wisdom, God sometimes allowed her virginal body to grow faint from the sheer force of love, so that her holy angels had to support and strengthen her. Thus was fulfilled the cry of the bride in the Song of Songs. Sustain me with flowers, for I am sick with love, Cant 2, 5. This holy affliction of divine love was a noble form of martyrdom, repeated thousands of times in the life of the Blessed Virgin, by which she surpassed all the martyrs, not only in merit, but even in suffering. The holy exercises and occupations of the Queen of Heaven in the first 18 months of her infancy. The suffering of love is so sweet and desirable that the greater its cause, the more the soul longs to hear about the one it loves, seeking to heal its wound by reopening it. This tender deception sustains the soul between a painful life and a sweet death. This was the experience of the infant Mary with her angels. She spoke to them about her beloved, and they answered her. Many times she asked them, saying, "Ministers of my Lord and his messengers, most beautiful works of his hands, sparks of that divine fire which inflames my heart, since you behold his eternal beauty without veil or shadow, tell me the signs of my beloved. What are his qualities? Inform me if I have displeased him in any way. Teach me what he desires and expects of me. Do not delay in relieving my sorrow, for I am faint with love." The sovereign spirits replied, "Spouse of the Most High, your beloved is the one who exists by himself alone, who needs nothing, yet all things depend on him. He is infinite in perfections, boundless in greatness, limitless in power, without end in wisdom, and measureless in goodness. He gave beginning to all creation without having one himself, governs without weariness, and sustains all things without needing them. He adorns all that exists with beauty, yet no one can fully comprehend his own. He makes those who behold him face to face eternally blessed. O Lady, the perfections of your beloved are infinite, surpassing our understanding, and his judgments are unsearchable to any creature." In these and many other conversations, far beyond our full comprehension, the Holy Virgin passed her childhood, immersed in divine contemplation with her angels and the Most High, in whom she was wholly transformed. As her fervor and longing to behold the supreme good intensified, whom she loved above all comprehension, many times, by the will of the Lord, and through the hands of her angels, she was physically taken to the empyrean heaven, where she enjoyed the presence of the divinity. On some of these occasions she saw him clearly. On others she beheld him only through infused species. Yet these visions were of the highest and most luminous kind. She also perceived the angels with clear and intuitive knowledge, understanding their ranks, orders, and hierarchies, along with many great mysteries revealed to her in these heavenly encounters. Since these experiences were granted to her repeatedly, through the habit of such divine contemplation and the acts she performed therein, she developed an intense and profound love, so much so that she seemed more divine than human. No other creature could have borne this grace, nor could even the mortal nature of the Queen herself have sustained it without dying, had it not been miraculously preserved by divine power. When in her infancy she had to receive some gift, kindness, or care from her holy parents or any other creature, she always accepted it with deep humility and gratitude, praying to the Lord that he might reward those who showed her such charity for his sake. Though she was already in the highest state of sanctity and filled with divine light and knowledge of the Lord's mysteries, she regarded herself as the least of all creatures. In her own self-estimation, she placed herself at the very lowest rank of all, and she even considered herself unworthy of the natural sustenance required for life, though she was, in truth, the Queen and Lady of all creation. Teaching of the Queen of Heaven. The holy exercises and occupations of the Queen of Heaven in the first 18 months of her infancy. My daughter, the one who receives more, should consider themselves the poorest, for their debt is greater. If all must humble themselves, knowing that by themselves they are nothing, can do nothing, and possess nothing, then all the more should one who has been raised from the dust by the powerful hand of the Most High be lowered to the ground. For left to themselves, without being or worth, they find themselves even more indebted and unable to repay what they have received. Let every creature recognize what they are in themselves. No one can claim I created myself, or I sustain myself, or I can prolong my life or prevent my death. All being and preservation depend entirely on the hand of the Lord. Let the creature humble itself in his presence, and you, dearest daughter, do not forget this lesson. I also want you to cherish as a great treasure the virtue of silence, which I began to practice from the moment of my birth. For in the Lord, I knew all virtues through the light I received from his mighty hand, and I loved silence with deep affection, resolving to keep it as my companion and friend throughout my life. And so I preserved it with inviolable care, even though I could have spoken from the moment I entered the world. Speaking without measure or weight is a two-edged sword that wounds both the speaker and the listener, and in both, it destroys charity or at least hinders all the virtues. From this, you can understand how greatly God is offended by the vice of an unbridled and disorderly tongue, and with what justice he withdraws his spirit and hides his face from the talkative, the restless, and those who engage in much conversation. Where many words are spoken, it is nearly impossible to avoid grave sins. Proverbs 10 verse 19. Only with God and his saints can one speak safely, and even then it must be with discretion and restraint. But with creatures, it is extremely difficult to preserve the perfect balance without exceeding what is just and necessary into what is excessive and superfluous. The remedy that will preserve you from this danger is to always lean toward the opposite extreme, exceeding in silence and restraint. For the prudent middle ground of speaking only what is necessary is found closer to speaking little than to speaking too much. Be mindful, my daughter, that if you do not keep God present in your heart and in the depths of your soul, you will be drawn into unnecessary and frivolous conversations with creatures, and what you would not do without shame or a sense of impropriety in the presence of another person, you should not do before your Lord and Master. Turn your ears away from deceitful chatter, which may lead you to speak what you should not. It is not just that you speak more than your Lord commands you. Listen instead to his holy law, which he has written with a generous hand upon your heart. Attend to the voice of your shepherd in your soul, and let your response be directed only to him. And I want you to understand that if you are to be my disciple and companion, you must distinguish yourself by excelling in this virtue of silence. Remain silent often, and engrave this teaching upon your heart now. Love this virtue more and more, for I first desire from you the love of silence, and then I will teach you how to speak. However, I do not forbid you from speaking when you are admonishing and consoling your daughters and those under your care. Speak also with those who can give you signs of your beloved, those who can awaken and enkindle in you love for him. In these conversations, you will acquire the silence that is most beneficial for your soul. For from this, you will develop a distaste and aversion for human conversations, and will desire only to speak of the eternal good that you long for. With the force of love, which will transform your being into that of your beloved, the turbulence of your passions will subside, and you will begin to experience something of that sweet martyrdom that I endured when I lamented my own body and life, seeing them as harsh prisons that hindered my flight, though they never hindered my love. Oh, my daughter, forget everything earthly in the secret of your silence, and follow me with all your fervor and strength, so that you may reach the state to which your spouse calls you, where you will hear the same consoling words that sustained me in my pain of love. My dove, open wide your heart and accept, my beloved, this sweet suffering, for my heart is wounded by your love. This is what the Lord said to me, and you have heard it repeated many times, for it is only to the silent and the recollected that his majesty speaks.